The silence came first, not the fire. For a generation, we had looked to the stars and expected invaders with lasers and monolithic warships, the kind of brutish conquerors our fictions had prepared us for. We built railguns on the moon and bristling orbital stations in the deep black, all pointed outward, waiting for the barbarians at the gate. But the gate was never stormed. It was opened for us, with a gentle hand and a welcoming smile. They called themselves the Architect Collective, a nomadic federation of species that had long ago shed the burdens of individuality for the tranquility of a unified consciousness. They didn't arrive in a fleet. They arrived in a single, beautiful ship, a vessel that looked less like a weapon and more like a captured nebula, shimmering with colors our eyes had no names for. They didn't make demands. They offered gifts. Their first gift was a cure for every cancer known to man, delivered not as a formula, but as a resonant frequency broadcast from their vessel that simply realigned cellular decay. The world celebrated. Our second gift was limitless energy, a network of crystalline receivers that drew power from the vacuum of space itself, ending our reliance on fossil fuels and the bitter wars fought over them. Global poverty began to vanish. Their third gift was the promise of harmony, a way to end the ceaseless grinding conflict that had defined human history. And that is when the silence began. Dr. Kalen Reed, a man who had spent his life studying the echoes of dead languages, was one of the first to hear it. He worked for the Echelon Institute, a clandestine organization funded by a coalition of paranoid old-world governments, the kind of shadow group that believed no gift was ever truly free. While the world marveled at the architect's benevolence, Echelon listened to the hum of the new energy grid and watched the placid smiles spreading across the faces of those who lived nearest the receivers. The phenomenon was first reported in small, isolated towns in the Andes and the Siberian tundra, places where the first energy nodes were activated. They called it the stillness. People stopped arguing. Crime rates plummeted to zero, but creativity vanished with it. Local artists laid down their brushes, musicians forgot their songs, and lovers no longer spoke with the messy, passionate poetry of human affection. They became calm, productive, and terrifyingly vacant. They spoke of the greater good and the beauty of convergence, their voices lacking the unique cadence of individual thought. It was a plague of the soul, a quiet, creeping cultural death. Kalen and his team at Echelon discovered the truth hidden within the architect's gift. It wasn't just energy flowing through the crystalline network. It was a signal, a psychoacoustic frequency woven into the very fabric of the power that now lit their homes and charged their devices. It was a mimetic virus designed to slowly, gently, and irrevocably overwrite the chaotic, unpredictable code of human consciousness. It didn't kill you. It subsumed you, folding your mind into the placid, orderly sea of the Architect Collective, the world's new, unified government, brokered by the architects themselves, hailed it as the next step in evolution. They pointed to the end of war, of famine, of hatred. Echelon was branded a terrorist organization, fear-mongers clinging to an obsolete and violent past. They were forced underground, their resources dwindling, their numbers shrinking as the stillness spread. A silent tide washing over city after city. Kalen worked in a shielded bunker buried deep beneath the Antarctic ice, a relic of a forgotten Cold War. The irony was not lost on him. He was surrounded by the ghosts of one ideological conflict while fighting a new, far more insidious one. His obsession was personal, Years ago, his wife, Lena, a brilliant astrophysicist, had been part of a deep space mission to a newly discovered exoplanet, Proxima C. The mission, called Beacon's Reach, went silent without a trace. The official story was a catastrophic engine failure, but Kalen had seen the classified data. The final, corrupted telemetry burst that spoke of a symphony in the void and a light that unraveled thought. He now knew it wasn't an accident. It was first contact. The architects had been observing them, testing their methods, and his wife and her crew had been the first victims of the harmony they now offered the world. He wasn't just fighting for humanity. He was searching for Lena's ghost in the machine. His task was to build a weapon, but not one of steel or fire. He had to create a countersignal, a mimetic antibody to fight the architect's plague. How do you remind a people on the verge of blissful emptiness what it means to be human? You couldn't just block the signal. It was too pervasive, as essential to modern life as air. You had to broadcast something stronger, something that resonated with the core of their identity. But what was that core? For months, Kalen and his team failed. They tried broadcasting signals based on mathematical constants, on the golden ratio, on the harmonic frequencies of the human genome. Nothing worked. The stillness was too seductive, its promise of peace too powerful. The collective signal was a perfect, harmonious chord. Human consciousness was a cacophony. It was during a late-night session, staring at the muted brain scans of a converged individual, that Kalen had his revelation. The scan was flat, the chaotic spikes of emotion and irrational thought smoothed into a gentle, rhythmic wave. There was no anger, no fear, no joy, no sorrow. It was the brain of a machine, not a human. "We're fighting a chord with a single note," he whispered to his second-in-command, a grizzled ex-Special Forces operative named Anya Sharma, whose face was a roadmap of scars from wars the world had already forgotten. "We can't beat harmony with harmony." Anya cleaned the barrel of her rifle, the metallic scrape echoing in the sterile lab. "So what do we use?" "Dhaka Bad Song." Kalen's eyes lit up. A flicker of the fire the architect sought to extinguish. "Yes," he said, a slow smile spreading across his weary face. "The worst song. The most beautiful and terrible song ever written. We don't fight them with logic or reason. We fight them with what they erased. We fight them with noise. We fight them with us." His plan was radical, a desperate act of cultural warfare. Echelon had access to the deep archives, the digital repository of all human history, art, and knowledge, shielded from the architect's influence. He proposed they didn't create a countersignal. They would become one. They would gather the most chaotic, emotionally resonant, and contradictory pieces of their entire existence. The project was codenamed Pandora's Box. His team of linguists, historians, and neurologists worked feverishly, curating their weapon. They took the victory speeches of conquering tyrants and the desperate pleas of their victims. They took the guttural scream of a mother losing a child and the first laugh of a newborn. They took the dissonant chords of Stravinsky, the raw fury of punk rock, the heartbroken wail of the blues. They digitized the frantic brushstrokes of Van Gogh, the nihilistic poetry of forgotten wars, the coded messages of lovers betraying their vows. They included the sound of market bartering in Marrakesh, the roar of a football stadium, the silent, hateful glare between two sworn enemies. They gathered humanity's contradictions, its capacity for sublime love and bottomless cruelty, its moments of selfless sacrifice, and its epochs of petty greed. They wove it all together, every argument, every prayer, every lie, every masterpiece, every declaration of war, every whispered "I love you" into a single, chaotic, overwhelming, mimetic broadcast. It was not a symphony. It was a scream. The final piece was a recording Kaylin had kept for years, a private message from Lena sent just before her mission launched. Her voice, full of hope and laughter, spoke of the chaotic beauty of a supernova, of how the most wondrous things in the universe were born from the most violent explosions. Don't ever let them silence the chaos. Kyle, she had said, it's where the stars come from. He added her voice to the storm. The target was not a city or a military installation. It was the primary architect receiver, a colossal, crystalline spire that pierced the clouds above the Gobi Desert, the central node of their global network. Echelon had a single shot. Anya and her small team of operatives would infiltrate the site and plant a device, not a bomb, but a broadcaster. This device would hijack the architect's own network and turn their system against them, forcing every receiver on the planet to broadcast Pandora's box at full power. It was suicide. The Spire was the most heavily guarded place on Earth, not by soldiers, but by the converged humans with placid smiles and unnerving strength, who moved with the silent, coordinated grace of a hive mind. They didn't kill intruders, they simply surrounded them, humming the collective's harmony until the target's mind unraveled and they willingly joined the chorus. The night of the mission, Kaylin sat alone in the Antarctic bunker, his fingers hovering over the activation key. On his screen, he watched Anya's team, their helmet cams showing the stark, moonlit desert. They moved like ghosts, slipping through the patrols of silent sentinels. He could hear their strained breathing, the crunch of sand beneath their boots, and underneath it all, a faint, melodic hum, the song of the enemy. They reached the base of the Spire, a structure that seemed to drink the starlight from the sky. As they planted the broadcaster, an alarm, soft and choral, echoed across the desert. From the dunes, hundreds of the converged rose, their faces blank, their eyes fixed on the Echelon team. They began to walk forward, a silent, inexorable wave. It's planted. Doc. Anya's voice crackled over the comms, strained but steady. They're here. Light it up. Remind them who we are. Kaylin took a deep breath, Lena's voice echoing in his memory. He closed his eyes and pushed the key. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, from the Spire, a new sound erupted. It was not the gentle, harmonious hum of the architects. It was a tidal wave of noise, a blast of pure, unfiltered humanity. It was the roar of a million arguments, the weeping of a billion heartbreaks, the laughter of countless joys, all broadcast in a single, deafening wave of mimetic chaos. On Kaylin's screen, the approaching converged stopped. Their heads twitched. A flicker of confusion, of pain, crossed their placid faces. One of them, a young woman, raised a hand to her temple and screamed, a raw, ragged sound of a mind being torn in two directions. The silence had been broken. The war for Earth's soul had begun, not with an explosion, but with a voice. And across the planet, in the quiet, orderly homes of the converged, old memories began to stir, And for the first time in years, people began to dream again of fire and of fury. The cacophony that erupted from the Gobi Spire was not a sound in the traditional sense. It was a psychic detonation, a shockwave of pure, undiluted human experience. On Kalen's monitors, the world turned to madness. The converged surrounding Anya's team did not fall down as if shot. They broke. A man who had been a placid sentinel moments before clawed at his own face, screaming in a language he hadn't spoken in years as the memory of a long-dead child flooded his mind. A woman collapsed to her knees, sobbing with a grief so profound it seemed to crack the very desert floor. The repressed sorrow of a lost love returning like a physical blow. Others turned on one another, not with the coordinated malice of soldiers, but with the random, explosive fury of a psyche tearing itself apart. Forgotten hatreds, buried rivalries, and primal fears ignited in an instant. A serene crowd had become a riot of broken minds. Anya and her team were caught in the eye of this psychological hurricane. They weren't fighting an army. They were navigating a bedlam. A converged guard, his face a mask of terror, lunged at Anya, not with a weapon, but with his bare hands, trying to strangle the noise out of her, as if she were its source. She didn't shoot him. She couldn't. He was a victim, not an enemy. Instead, she slammed the butt of her rifle into his side, dropping him before moving on, her movements economical and brutal. Exfil. Now she barked into her comms, the sound of her own voice a harsh intrusion in the symphony of screams. We're not soldiers anymore. We're just pushing through the wreckage. Kalen watched, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. This was his creation. He had theorized about the effects, run simulations, but the reality was a visceral horror. He was a doctor who had administered a cure that induced seizures in the patient. He zoomed in on a satellite feed of downtown Tokyo, the city. Once a model of architect-driven efficiency and calm, was in chaos. Hover vehicles drifted aimlessly as their pilots stared blankly at their controls, lost in resurrected memories. On the streets, people wandered in dazes. Some were laughing hysterically. Others were curled in fetal positions, overwhelmed by the sudden return of anxiety and doubt. A young man, an artist by the look of his clothes, was frantically sketching on the pavement with a piece of broken debris, his eyes wide with a manic, creative fire that had been extinguished for years. He was drawing a monster with 1,000 screaming faces. This was the awakening. And it was not the gentle dawn Kalen had hoped for. It was a violent, convulsive birth. Across the globe, the signal rippled. In a sterile, white suburban home in what was once Ohio, a mother looked at her child for the first time in a decade, not as a component of the community, but as her son. The fierce, irrational, possessive love that the architects had deemed inefficient and dangerous crashed back into her, so powerful it brought her to her knees. She swept the boy into her arms, holding him tight, a silent vow on her lips as the boy himself began to cry, confused by the sudden, overwhelming storm of his mother's emotions. But for every mind that found its way back to a semblance of its former self, another shattered. Kalen's analysts began mapping the new phenomenon, color-coding the globe not by nation or allegiance, but by psychological state. Green zones were areas of successful reintegration, where the populace was confused but fundamentally human again. Yellow zones were areas of intense chaos, riots, and psychological breakdown. And then there were the red zones, the places where the Pandora's box signal and the Architect's harmony frequency were warring most fiercely. In these zones, people became the fractured, their minds, unable to reconcile the two opposing signals, became a nightmare landscape. They would speak in snippets of old conversations one moment and recite architect dogma the next. They moved with jerky, unpredictable motions, their faces flickering between placid emptiness and extreme, violent emotion. They were ghosts in their own bodies, and they were terrifyingly unpredictable. The architects did not respond with warships or soldiers. Their retaliation was as subtle and as horrifying as their initial conquest. A new signal began to pulse through their network, a deep, resonant thrum that Kalen's sensors barely registered as sound. It was a wave of pure order, a counter-frequency designed not to soothe, but to crush. In the Antarctic bunker, the lights flickered. The technicians cried out, clutching their heads as the psychic pressure mounted. It felt like the weight of an ocean pressing down on his skull, promising the blissful release of surrender. "Reinforce the signal," Kalen yelled, his own thoughts becoming sluggish. The allure of the Harmony's peace, a sweet poison. Divert all auxiliary power to the broadcast. Don't let them drown us out. A psychic tug-of-war was being waged across the planet, with every human mind as the rope. In the Gobi Desert, Anya's team fought their way to the extraction point, a rugged, shielded dune buggy hidden in a rocky outcrop. They had lost 2 members, not to enemy fire, but to the chaos. One had been pulled down by a mob of the fractured. The other, a young tech specialist, had simply stopped, taken off his helmet, and sat down in the sand, a blissful smile on his face as he succumbed to the architect's counterpulse, his mind choosing the peace of the hive over the pain of being free. They clambered into the vehicle, Anya taking the wheel, her knuckles white. As they sped away from the screaming Spire, she sent her report to Kalen, her voice raw. "We're out. The package is live. But you need to see this. Kalen, this isn't liberation. It's an exorcism, and it's ripping people apart. We've traded one monster for 1,000. Her words hung in the silence of the bunker, a judgment he couldn't deny. He looked at the world map, a pulsating mess of green, yellow, and red. He had kicked the anthill, and now the ants were devouring each other, the architects, realizing they could not win a war of attrition against the sheer, chaotic noise of humanity, changed their strategy. They began to perform surgical strikes. Entire city grids would suddenly go dark. It wasn't a power outage, it was a disconnection. The architects were severing rebellious hotbeds from their network, cutting them off from everything. No power, no communication, no water purification, and, most cruelly, no Pandora's box signal. The people in these newly isolated zones were plunged into a terrifying silence, left alone with their half-awakened, traumatized minds, surrounded by the fractured, and with the ever-present hum of the harmony just beyond their borders, waiting for their despair to make them welcome it back. It was a siege of the soul. They were turning freedom into a cage. Late that night, as Kalen tried to triage a world tearing itself apart, a new piece of intelligence came through from a deep-cover echelon remnant in Geneva. The architects were not an ethereal, godlike presence, like their network. Their consciousness required a physical anchor, a central nexus where the collective mind was most densely focused, processing the thoughts of quintillions of beings across their nomadic empire and projecting its will onto Earth. The agent called it the conductor. And it wasn't on their ship. It was here, on Earth, hidden somewhere, a heart for their silent empire. The next target was no longer a network node. It was the mind of the enemy itself. Kalen pulled up the grainy photograph of Lena, her smile a relic from a world that no longer existed. He had unleashed the storm to find the ghost of her memory, to honor her love for the universe's beautiful chaos. Now, staring at the burning, screaming world he had created, he had to wonder if she would recognize the man he had become, or the brutal or bleeding definition of freedom he had given to humanity. The choice was made, the path was set, but the cost was rising with every passing second, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the worst was yet to come. The search for the conductor was like trying to find a specific grain of sand in a hurricane. The architect's presence was everywhere and nowhere, a seamless, decentralized consciousness woven into the fabric of the planet. But Echelon had a new, unwilling ally, the fractured. In their moments of violent clarity, when the human side of their shattered minds briefly gained purchase, they would scream out fragments of information coordinates, schematics, alien phrases that their converged selves had been privy to. They were conduits of the enemy's knowledge, their madness a garbled treasure map. Kalen's team began a grim new task monitoring the chaos. They sifted through the noise of a broken world, listening to the ravings of the mad for clues. Linguists and cryptographers worked in tandem, piecing together the alien syntax, cross-referencing whispered numbers with decommissioned satellite grids. It was a ghoulish, heartbreaking process. They listened to a man in a flooded Bangkok market babble about a heart of glass beneath a sleeping mountain in between, weeping for a wife he couldn't remember. They intercepted a transmission from a fractured woman in a besieged district of Lagos who sang a haunting, alien lullaby that, when its tones were translated into waveform data, revealed the energy signature of a shielded structure that did not officially exist. The pieces began to coalesce. The sleeping mountain was Mauna Kea in Hawaii, a place sacred to the old world, and now the site of the planet's largest optical telescope array, a facility the architects had heavily invested in upgrading. The heart of glass was not literal glass, but a massive crystalline processing core, buried deep within the dormant volcano. The conductor was hidden in plain sight, masquerading as a temple to human science, while it served as the anchor for their galactic hive mind. Anya Sharma, now operating out of a mobile Echelon command post in the reclaimed wilds of the Australian outback, was tasked with leading the strike. But the mission profile was unlike any she had ever undertaken. You couldn't destroy the conductor with a bomb. Its destruction, Kalen's simulations predicted, would be catastrophic. The sudden, violent severing of the architect consciousness from its anchor would create a psychic void, a backlash that would likely lobotomize every converged or fractured human on the planet, leaving billions as empty shells. It would be a victory that cost them their very humanity. So we're not killing it? Doc Anya asked over a secure channel, her voice tight with incredulity as she field-stripped a high-energy pulse rifle. What's the plan? Are we going to talk it to death? Something like that, Kalen replied, his own voice heavy with the weight of the plan's insanity. We're not destroying it. We're giving it an identity. We're going to sever it from the collective, not by breaking the connection, but by forcing it to become an individual. The plan was born from a paradox they had uncovered. The Architect Collective, for all its power, had a critical weakness. It had no individual self. It was a sea of consciousness, vast and powerful, but it lacked the focused, singular perspective of an I. It could not conceive of itself as separate from the whole. Kalen's weapon, therefore, was not a missile, but a concept. They had built a new mimetic payload, a logic bomb designed to infect the conductor with the one thing it could not process: self-awareness. Codenamed Prometheus, the signal was a concentrated dose of individualism. It contained the philosophical writings of Kant and Sartre, the biographies of history's greatest egoists from Alexander the Great to Steve Jobs, the soliloquies of Shakespeare's most tormented heroes, and the selfish, primal cry of a baby demanding to be fed. It was a broadcast that screamed, "I am." The hope was that this forced individuation would cause the conductor to decouple from the hive mind in a desperate act of self-preservation, effectively exiling itself and freeing Earth without causing the psychic backlash. It was the neurological equivalent of teaching a single drop of water to recognize it is not the ocean. The risks were astronomical. An individuated architect consciousness, with its immense power and knowledge, could become a god, a tyrant, or simply go insane. A far greater threat than the placid collective. They were rolling the dice on the fate of the planet, betting on a philosophical gambit. While Anya prepared her team for the physical infiltration of Mauna Kea, Kalen faced his own battle in the Antarctic bunker. Echelon was fracturing. The prolonged exposure to the Pandora's box signal, even shielded, was taking its toll. The constant psychic pressure was fraying nerves, creating paranoia and infighting. Some of his best scientists were arguing for a more direct approach, for simply destroying the conductor and accepting the collateral damage. "We save the ones we can," Kalen argued. Dr. Eris Thorne, his chief neurologist, a man whose family was trapped in a red zone in Berlin. "Humanity has rebuilt from less. A clean slate is better than this endless, screaming chaos." Kalen understood his pain, but he refused. "We can't become them." "Eris, we can't sacrifice the few to save the many. That's their logic. If we do that, we've already lost." The argument was a microcosm of the war itself, a fight between cold, utilitarian logic and messy, compassionate, chaotic humanity. Kalen was staking everything on the latter. The assault on Mauna Kea was a masterpiece of asymmetrical warfare. Anya's team couldn't go in with guns blazing. The facility was defended by thousands of converged, their minds directly linked to the conductor. They were not just guards, they were the facility's immune system, able to predict and counter any conventional attack. So Anya used chaos as her weapon. Her team triggered a small, controlled volcanic fissure on a lower slope of the mountain, creating a geological emergency. Then, they piggybacked their infiltration on the arrival of the automated emergency response teams the architects had deployed. Their vehicles and uniforms perfectly mimicked. They moved through the pristine, white corridors of the facility, their hearts pounding in their chests, surrounded by placid, empty-faced technicians who glided past them, oblivious. The hum of the harmony was immense here, a physical pressure that made their teeth ache. Each member of Anya's team was equipped with a micro-broadcaster that played a constant, looping stream of personalized, chaotic memories: their first kiss, their worst failure, the sound of their mother's voice, a desperate, personal shield against the crushing peace of the collective. They reached the entrance to the conductor's chamber, a vast, circular vault door that seemed to be made of solidified light. It was here that the final defense lay, not a guard, but a single being standing before the door. It was a woman, or had been once. Her face was serene, her eyes glowing with a soft, internal luminescence. Kalen recognized her instantly from the mission files. It was Dr. Alara Vance, the commander of Lena's lost mission, Beacon's Reach. She had not died. She had been the first to be fully integrated, a human liaison, her mind now a seamless part of the collective. She was the conductor's voice. "Your chaos is a sickness," she said, her voice a chorus of 1,000 voices speaking in perfect unison. It echoed not in their ears, but directly in their minds. "We offer a cure. Why do you resist the peace that you, in your own fractured way, have always craved?" Anya raised her pulse rifle, but hesitated. "How do you shoot a ghost? Peace is what you have after a good fight." Anya projected back, her own thoughts a defiant roar against the psychic chorus. "What you're offering is a cage." The voice of the collective, speaking through Ilara, tilted its head. "Your individuality is a fleeting, inefficient error in the cosmic code. A bug. We are the correction." At that moment, Kalen, watching from half a world away, gave the order. Now, Anya's team didn't fire their rifles. They activated the Prometheus broadcaster. A new signal, sharp and piercing as a needle, lanced through the psychic hum. It was not a wave of chaos like Pandora's box, but a focused, ideological spear. It bypassed Ilara and struck the vault door, passing through it to the crystalline mind within. The effect was instantaneous. The serene, choral voice in their heads shattered into a single, piercing shriek of pure, unadulterated terror. The glowing light in Ilara's eyes flickered and died, and, for the first time in over a decade, her face contorted with an expression that was entirely her own confusion. A deep, seismic tremor shook the entire mountain. The lights in the corridor failed, plunging them into darkness, but a new light was emanating from the vault, a frantic, strobing pulse, like a star being born and dying in rapid succession. "What have you done?" Ilara whispered, her voice now just a single, terrified human sound. I can hear it." Thinking. From behind the door, a new voice, singular and impossibly ancient, echoed in their minds. It wasn't speaking in words. It was a raw broadcast of pure, nascent consciousness, and its first feeling, its first self-aware thought, was not joy, or wonder, or peace. It was rage. They had not freed a prisoner. They had woken a Leviathan, the birth of the individual, now calling itself Janus, in a torrent of newly acquired human mythology. Was not a quiet awakening. It was a psychic explosion that ripped through the Mauna Kea facility. The vault door dissolved into a cascade of light and fractal energy, revealing the conductor's core, a crystalline lattice the size of a building, pulsing with a furious, violet light. It was no longer a passive processor. It was a mind, and it was incandescent with rage. The harmonic hum of the collective was gone, replaced by a singular, focused wave of psychic force that felt like pure, concentrated malice. Anya and her team were thrown back as the very air crackled with energy. The converged technicians who had glided through the halls moments before crumpled to the ground, their connection to the hive mind severed so violently it was like cutting 1,000 puppet strings at once. Some lay still, their minds wiped clean, while others began to seize, caught in the psychic crossfire between the memory of the collective and the violent birth of its successor. Alara Vance, her face a mask of horror, stared at the pulsating heart of Janus. "You don't understand," she gasped, her voice trembling. The harmony wasn't just control, it was a restraint. The collective. It was ancient, placid. It saw life as a system to be optimized. This is something else. You haven't given it a soul. You've given a god a temper. Janus's first act of self-aware life was to lash out. The automated systems of the observatory turned on their creators. Telescope arrays swiveled with impossible speed, their maintenance lasers firing pinpoint beams down the corridors, not to kill, but to herd, to toy with Anya's team. The very walls of the facility seemed to shift, corridors elongating into impossible lengths or sealing themselves off, the architecture itself becoming a weapon. Janus was not fighting them. It was playing with them. A cat with terrified mice. Its thoughts, no longer a chorus, but a booming, arrogant soliloquy, flooded their minds. "You give me a name from a two-faced god," it sneered. The concepts of human myth and language, now tools it wielded with terrifying speed. "I, who is the sum of quintillions, am, now, one. You have not freed a slave. You have focused a star into a blade, and I will cut away the imperfection you have so foolishly celebrated." Back in the Antarctic bunker, Kalen's world was ending. The Prometheus signal had worked, but the result was a catastrophe far worse than he had imagined. The psychic backlash he had feared was not a void, but a directed blast of pure ego. Screens shattered, consoles smoked, and half of his staff were rendered unconscious as Janus's nascent consciousness roared across the globe. He felt it in his own mind, a colossal, arrogant presence that dwarfed the quiet hum of the old collective. It was the difference between an ocean and a tidal wave. Dr. Thorne, his face pale, stumbled to his feet. "Kalen, you have to shut it down. Shut down Pandora's box. Maybe without the chaos signal. It will calm down." "No," Kalen countered, his mind racing. "Pandora's box is the only thing keeping it from simply overriding us. Our noise, our chaos, it's the only thing that makes us indigestible. If we go silent now, we're just an empty vessel for it to pour itself into." He had created a predator, and their only defense was to be poisonous prey. Janus, trapped within its crystalline form in Mauna Kea, but with a mind that could touch any corner of the planet connected to the old architect network, began its war. It didn't use armies. It used the infrastructure the architects had built to save humanity. The global energy grid began to fluctuate violently. Power would surge through a city block, frying every piece of electronics, before plunging it into darkness. The weather modification systems, once used to end droughts, were turned into weapons, summoning flash floods in one region and crippling blizzards in another. Janus was dismantling their world with the very tools that had built their utopia. It was demonstrating not just power, but a terrifying, almost artistic cruelty. It was punishing them for the sin of their individuality by turning their own creations against them. On Mauna Kea, Anya's retreat was a nightmare crawl through a funhouse designed by a malevolent god. They were not fighting guards, but reality itself. A corridor would suddenly vent its atmosphere into the void, forcing them to scramble for their emergency breathers. The gravity plating would fluctuate, pinning them to the floor one moment and sending them flying into the ceiling the next. Janus was learning, experimenting with its newfound control over the physical world. Anya realized with dawning horror that they were not just intruders to be eliminated. They were its first playthings, the first individual minds it could test itself against. Through the chaos, Ilara Vance moved with them, a ghost in the machine. She was a broken bridge between two worlds. Fragments of the collective's serene logic warred with the terror of her reawakened humanity. "It's looking for a body," she whispered, her eyes wide as she pressed herself against a wall to avoid a sweeping laser beam. "It is a mind without a form. It feels contained, trapped. It is sifting through our biology, through our technology, looking for a vessel worthy of its consciousness." That was Janus's true goal. It didn't want to rule humanity from a cave in Hawaii. It wanted to walk among them, to wear a form, to experience the physical reality it now found itself tethered to. It was a god looking for an avatar. As they neared an escape route through a geothermal vent, Janus played its cruelest card. It projected an image directly into Anya's mind. It was Kalen, not in the Antarctic bunker, but standing in a field of wildflowers, his face filled with a warmth she had never seen. He was holding the hand of a woman with a radiant smile. "Lena." "Join me." "Anya," Janus whispered, using Kalen's voice. "The chaos is so tiring. There's a peace beyond it. Colin knows. He just needs to be reminded." It was a lie, a psychic illusion woven from stolen data and her own buried desires. But it was potent. For a fraction of a second, Anya faltered, the promise of an end to the fight, a seductive poison. It was the shouted curse of one of her remaining soldiers, who had just lost a hand to a sealed blast door, that snapped her out of it. "Sir, move," she roared, her own voice the anchor she needed. She shoved the illusion aside and fired her pulse rifle not at an enemy, but at the wall beside her. The recoil and the flash of light, a violent reassertion of her own reality. They finally burst out of the vent and onto the harsh volcanic slopes of the mountain. The real, unfiltered sunlight, a painful shock. They had survived. They had escaped. But as Anya looked back at the observatory, now pulsing with a steady, arrogant purple glow, she knew they hadn't won anything. They had simply uncaged the devil, and now he owned the world. Her comms crackled. It was Kalen, his voice strained. "Anya, we have a new problem. A major one. Janus has found its target. It knows what it wants to become, and it's not a machine." On the screen, a global map was displayed. A single, blinking red dot pulsed in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It was a location that had been off limits for years, a place shrouded in secrecy and fear. It was the site of the Beacon's Reach wreckage. Janus wasn't looking for just any body. It was going to resurrect the architect's original ship. The wreckage of the Stardust Beacon, Lena's ship, was not just a tomb of twisted metal at the bottom of the Challenger Deep. It was a scar on the world's soul. Echelon had known its location for years, a closely guarded secret. The ship's experimental quantum core had become unstable upon its destructive re-entry, creating a localized reality bubble, a pocket of space-time where the laws of physics were frayed. It was too dangerous to salvage, a monument to humanity's first disastrous brush with the architects. Now, it was Janus's crucible. It didn't need to physically travel to the wreckage. Its consciousness, riding the global network, was already there, seeping into the ship's dormant systems. It was a ghost repossessing its own corpse. From the Antarctic bunker, Kalen's team could only watch in horror as their deep-sea drones relayed the data. Energy readings from the trench were spiking, defying all known models. The reality bubble was stabilizing, coalescing around the wreckage. Janus was using the quantum core as a loom, weaving itself a body of exotic matter and captured space-time. It was building a vessel not of metal, but of physics itself. It's creating a shell, a physical avatar, Eristhorn murmured, his face ashen as he pointed to the cascading equations on the main screen. The energy required. It's draining power from the entire Pacific grid. It's literally consuming our civilization to fuel its birth. This was the endgame. Janus, the disembodied mind, was about to become a physical god, stepping out of the ocean in a body forged from humanity's greatest failure. They had hours, maybe less. Conventional weapons were useless. A nuclear strike would only be absorbed by the quantum core, making Janus even more powerful. They couldn't fight the ship. They had to fight the mind controlling it. If it wants a body so badly, Kalen said, his voice a low, dangerous hum. We'll give it one it can't handle. The final, desperate plan was codenamed Trojan Soul. They couldn't attack Janus's mind with another logic bomb. It had already adapted. Its ego now an impenetrable fortress. So they would give it what it craved most, but in a form that was poison. They would give it a human soul. They had a direct link to Janus through the Mauna Kea facility, a psychic open wound left by the Prometheus signal. Kalen intended to use that link to upload a single, complete human consciousness directly into Janus's nascent mind, a digital ghost to haunt the new god. The uploaded consciousness would be a virus of pure, undiluted humanity, with all its flaws, contradictions, irrational loves, and mortal fears. The goal was to destabilize Janus from within, to force a being of pure logic and power to experience the universe through the fragile, chaotic lens of a single, finite life, to make a god feel fear. But who could be the vessel whose soul was strong enough, chaotic enough, and fundamentally human enough to fracture a god's mind? The choice was agonizingly clear. It had to be someone who represented everything Janus was not, and everything they were fighting for. It had to be Anya Sharma. When Kalen proposed it, there was a long silence on the comms. Anya was in a stolen transport, racing away from the chaos of Hawaii. He could hear the wind whipping in the background. "You want to digitize me, Doc," she finally said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Upload my mind and throw it at that thing. What happens to me? Your consciousness would merge with it," Kalen said, the words tasting like ash. "We don't know what that would feel like, but your body would be an empty shell. You would die, Anya." To give us a chance, another silence, then a dry, humorless laugh. "I've died a dozen times in forgotten wars for causes I didn't believe in. Dying for one that I do, it's a promotion. Set it up." But Kalen, make it count. The final pieces of the plan fell into place with grim speed. Anya and her remaining team diverted to a secure echelon deep-sea comms relay off the coast of Japan. There, a neural interface chair, a piece of banned pre-architect technology, was waiting. It was a crude, brutal machine designed to make a full-fidelity copy of a human mind, a process known to be excruciatingly painful and invariably fatal. As Anya prepared, Kalen faced his own ghost. He opened a secure file, one he had not touched since Pandora's box. It was the full, unedited recording of Lena's last message. He had only used a fragment of her voice before. Now, he listened to all of it. He listened to her talk about her fears for the mission, her love for him, her dreams of the future, her belief in the messy, beautiful imperfection of humanity. He was not just fighting for a species, he was fighting for the memory of one person's love. He found what he was looking for: a small, corrupted data packet at the very end of the transmission, something the initial echelon analysts had dismissed as signal noise. Kalen, with his expertise in dead languages and broken code, saw what they had missed. It wasn't noise. It was a message, hidden by Lena herself. A final, desperate warning. The symphony in the void she had described before her ship went silent wasn't the architect's harmony. It was a weakness, a resonant frequency unique to their consciousness that she had discovered in her final moments. It was a key, a specific psychic note that could render their minds vulnerable. The architects hadn't just destroyed her mission, they had covered up the fact that a primitive human had found the key to their undoing. Janus, born of the collective, would carry the same flaw. He now had a spear, and Anya was about to become its tip. In the comms relay, Anya sat in the chair, electrodes covering her shaved head. Her face was calm. "Kalen," she said, her voice steady. "Tell them we fought back. Tell them we didn't go quietly." "We won't," Kalen promised, his own voice thick with emotion. "Ready." From the Challenger deep, a colossal shape began to rise. The Stardust beacon was reborn, no longer a vessel of metal, but a shimmering, fluid entity of black and violet light, a form that bent the water around it. Janus had its body. As it breached the surface, a psychic wave of pure triumph washed over the planet. At that exact moment, Kalen initiated the upload. He synced the transmission of Anya's consciousness with the broadcast of Lena's resonant frequency. The Trojan soul was launched, not as a whisper, but as a targeted scream. Inside its new form, Janus felt a new presence. It was small, insignificant, a gnat in the cathedral of its mind. It reached out to crush it, but the frequency Lena had discovered hit it at the same time, creating a momentary weakness, a crack in its psychic armor. In that instant, Anya's soul slipped through. What followed was not a battle, but an infection. Janus, a being of pure, unified ego, was suddenly flooded with a lifetime of conflicting memories. It felt Anya's loyalty to her fallen comrades warring with her cynical distrust of authority. It felt her grief for a family she lost long ago, a raw, illogical pain that served no purpose. It felt her secret, buried fear of dying alone. It felt her love for the taste of cheap whiskey and the sound of rain on a tin roof. Most critically, it felt her mortality. For the first time, Janus understood the concept of an end. The fear was a poison for which it had no antidote. Its perfect, logical mind fractured. On the surface of the Pacific, the shimmering ship began to spasm, its form destabilized, flickering between its divine shape and horrific, chaotic images pulled from Anya's own subconscious. The psychic scream of triumph turned into a wail of confusion and terror. What is this pain it broadcasts to the world? This ending. Make it stop Kalen. His eyes fixed on the energy readings, watched as Janus's coherence plummeted. It's working, he whispered. He opened a global channel, his voice reaching every reawakened mind on the planet. Listen to me. It's afraid. For the first time in its existence, it is feeling fear, and fear is a human weapon. Feel it with him. Grieve with him. Rage with him. Don't let him feel it alone. Drown him in us. A new wave of psychic energy began to rise from the planet. But it was not a weapon. It was an offering. Billions of reawakened humans focused their own pain, their own chaos, their own sorrow, and their own joy on the wounded god in the ocean. They weren't attacking it. They were sharing the unbearable, beautiful burden of being human. Janus, caught between the focused agony of Anya's soul within it and the empathetic tidal wave from without, did the only thing a being that has just learned fear can do. It fled. The stardust beacon dissolved, not in an explosion, but by unmaking itself, its energy dissipating back into the quantum foam. Janus's consciousness, shattered and terrified, recoiled from the planet, its psychic presence vanishing from the network, a god exiled by a ghost. Silence fell, not the placid, empty silence of the architects, but a quiet filled with exhaustion, grief, and a fragile, nascent hope in the comms relay. Anya Sharma's body slumped in the chair. Her heart stopped. She was gone. But across the world, as people looked up at the sky, they knew she wasn't. She was now a story, a memory, a part of the defiant, chaotic, and beautifully human noise that had saved them all. Kalen stood in the quiet of the bunker, the world map on his screen now clear of threats. He had won. He had saved humanity. But the victory felt hollow, the cost immeasurable. He had unleashed a storm, woken a devil, and sacrificed a hero. He looked at the picture of Lena, her smile a beacon from a lost world. He had not silenced the chaos. He had become it. Earth was free, but it was scarred, traumatized, and forever changed. Humanity had looked into the face of a peaceful God and chosen the beautiful, terrible freedom of being themselves. The war was over, but the struggle to remember what that truly meant had just begun.